everyone. Welcome to today's talk story session. It's going to be kind of informal. The purpose of this project is really just, or its purpose of this talk is really just to sort of provide an update in terms of the current status of the oral history project, and to give a little bit of insight in terms of where we're currently at with this particular stage. My name is Donald Carreira Ching. I'm the director of the project, and I'm joined by Ken Tokuno, who is also a co-director and an interviewer. We've also got Mahealani Perez Wendt, who is an interviewee and also just an amazing poet and writer and scholar. And Hope Matsumoto, also an amazing writer and scholar and PhD graduate student at UH Manoa, and Christina, an amazing writer and scholar as well, also in the PhD program at UH. Hope and Christina are also interviewers along with Ken. Okay, next slide. So for those who are new to the Bamboo Ridge Oral History Project or oral history projects in general, just to give folks a sense, oral history projects, sometimes folks think oral history projects are like journalistic interviews, but an oral history project is not like that at all, really. It's really an opportunity for the interviewee, the person who's being interviewed, tell their story in the way that they want to tell it, to focus on the things that matter to them and to their particular record. It's really a more personal, I want to say subjective experience, but I don't know if I necessarily describe it in that particular way, but it's their perspective on the ways in which history happened for them. And so it celebrates their knowledge, it celebrates their stories and traditions and history, as well as the impact that they've made to the larger community and the larger history, especially here in Hawaii. In this particular project, much of the focus when we started out was on Bamboo Ridge as sort of a core. But when I came on board, I really just using that to sort of expand and look at the scope of literatures of Hawaii much more broadly. So on the first stage, we're kind of in the third stage now. We've been working on this for a long time, very long. We've been working on this for around 3 to 4 years. It came about, through an informal conversation between Ken and Craig Howes, who's a scholar and a professor in life writing at UH Manoa. And basically with the passing of Maria Farah, a discussion of these sort of important voices and this important history being lost, and should we record that history? And from there, again, it sort of expanded out to include, lots and lots and lots of individuals. An oral history project was kind of chosen because I think for the most part, many of the sort of conversations, questions, and information that folks know about kind of literatures of Hawaii as it relates to Bamboo Ridge, local literature, these kinds of things, has kind of been written through various critical debates and scholarly papers and all kinds of other things over the years. But an oral history project really allows for that personal perspective and that additional context that can't be captured in those scholarly papers. And it also offers a perspective that you don't get when you have those kind of scholarly, perspectives written 10, 20 years ago. Those things kind of become static. And that's really a problem for a lot of these conversations because they're not static, right? They're constantly changing as, more work gets written and published. The culture itself changes, the market itself changes, all kinds of other things happen. So for this stage, we're in the third stage. It was really about going from that sort of core list of individuals like Eric Chalk and Daryl Lum, then to the second stage, which included some of the more scholars like Stephen Sumida and Arnold Hura and Rob Wilson, that's what I'm thinking of. And then moving into today. So we were sort of, the first and second stages really kind of sticking to around the 70s and 80s. In this particular stage, it was kind of expanding that out, including more indigenous voices and perspectives, more diversity in terms of those perspectives, as well as exploring kind of the crucial thing that I was most interested in, was the debates and divisions around the 90s. So, in terms of individuals who were interviewed in this particular stage, we had scholars like Craig Howes being interviewed to give perspective because he was around during that particular period and through the present as well. We had Rodney Morales interviewed to sort of discuss his seminal paper literature, as well as provide added context to that. And maybe in the takeaway section, I'll mention sort of some of the interesting things that came about through that conversation. Christina Bacliega as well, giving some insights, not only to things that were happening at Bamboo Ridge and Literatures of Hawaii, but also giving information on what was happening at the university, which we've already sort of gained and understood through the other stages. We knew that when Literatures of Hawaii was sort of gaining more prominence in mainstream culture in the 70s and 80s, there was a huge shift in the university. A lot of issues were coming about there as well too. So we saw through some of these interviews, some of those discussions. Yeah, and we also have Mahealani Perez Wendt, a really, really important voice throughout the last, 30, I don't know, we're in 2025.
Century.
God, how many? Yeah, I know, like 2025, it feels like, gosh, when I say like a couple decades, it's actually like longer than this. I don't know, like 40 years or something, right? If we're going from the 80s, longer than that, maybe. And other individuals as too, Lee Luna, Annie Nishida, Nora Okja Keller, and Joseph Stanton. In terms of things that we have learned, and there were actually, there were other individuals who were selected in this particular stage, and things, as with all oral history projects, or an oral history project is really developed through a relationship between the subject or the person who's being interviewed and the interviewee. And sometimes the subject, for whatever reason, or the person that we want to contact and get an interview, does not want to be interviewed. Sometimes that's for health reasons, sometimes that's for personal reasons. Sometimes they just want their work to stand out of the history. So there were probably, in addition to the list that we have here, probably at least 3 or 4 more individuals that were contacted that for a variety of reasons weren't able to participate. They may participate in the future, although we'll sort of get to the future on the 5th slide. All right. So some key accomplishments from this particular stage. I think, again, once we have a greater understanding of the debate during the period, this particular stage really allowed us to sort of get into some of the stuff that's not printed in the page, that hasn't been published, about some of the divisions of what was going on with Literatures of Hawaii at the time, and provide additional context. Some things that we learned during this particular period included additional publications that actually have not been covered, or that were not sort of discussed in as great a detail as some of these other earlier works, which, when sort of looking back on it, would have really changed some of these conversations. So that was really important. I think we gained a lot more insight in terms of what was going on in the university, especially in the 90s, and how things were changing, not only in terms of what was being taught, but the way in which local authors and folks who were from here were being treated, and a greater appreciation for that, and that appreciation kind of coming at a little bit of a fight. It was not an easy road. And I think, as once the sort of transcripts finally go to the website, you'll sort of see that that fight continues to some degree. And I think, again, a greater diversity of perspectives and voices in this particular stage, which is really, really, really important. In terms of the future, if folks are wondering, sort of where things are going from here, I think, as always, and has been discussed in past sort of presentations on this project, we may be considering a print publication, although, I'm not in charge of that, so I can't really tell you whether that's actually going to happen or not, but, that is being considered. When we've done these before, it's always been like, what's the next stage? What's the next stage? What's the next stage? At this point, no next stage, maybe. The project may continue, but at this particular stage, the project is done, at least as far as I'm concerned. Again, we might continue on, and that's not just because the project has been going on for such a long period of time, but it's also because we sort of entered the present. We're sort of in the 2000s mode now. We've kind of covered the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. A lot of the folks that we're going to be talking to, yeah, exactly. If you're not following in the chat, that's there. I'm responding to that. Is, a lot of the folks are still working and still publishing, and a lot of things that we're seeing right now in terms of literature's Hawaii are still happening. So it might be a little bit too premature to continue on, but and of course also I think funding always remains an issue. We've been really lucky to have the support of the Hawaii Council for Humanities, but because of changes at the federal level, that's just not going to happen, unfortunately. Yeah, your vote matters. So maybe in the future, in a couple of years, we might revisit sort of continuing the project. But at this particular stage, we've interviewed something like 30 individuals. We've gained so much perspective in terms of everything that's out there. Of course, there's always things that we could miss. And with the consideration of a future publication, it is possible that those kinds of perspectives that we weren't able to fund through the sort of HCH funding could still be incorporated in some way, but that is something that we'll take on sort of after sort of regroup. I need to rest. I need to rest. Okay. Right. And then we'll move on to what most folks who are going to be watching this video or here in attendance are probably interested in, and that's sort of the questions for the panel. So, I think, I don't know how we want to go about this. It's pretty informal. It's just really talking story. So maybe if we just want to go around the panel, and if you folks just want to share maybe why you wanted to participate in the project. Yeah, we'll start there. Why did you want to participate in the project? We can start with whoever wants to talk. Just unmute yourself and just go.
I'll go. Well, first of all, I was just like super flattered. Why would anybody want to interview me about this? And the experience was really wonderful. I did not expect that that Hope who interviewed me, that she would be so prepared in terms of familiarizing herself with my work. And I remember even as we were progressing through the interview, I was kind of stuttering over certain places, trying to remember what I had written, and she knew. That was really funny. I said, "Oh, I wrote this thing about," and she goes, and she named it, and oh yeah, that's the one. So I was just really impressed with Hope, but also I did think that, a perspective, having participated for, so many years, would be valuable. So I know one of my takeaways, not just from having participated in this project, but after, having that perspective of actually retrospective, so full of gratitude for the work of Bamboo Ridge, because of all the local literary publications, Bamboo Ridge is the one that has remained steadfast, and not only publishing work, but publishing work that is curated at a very high quality of writing, and truly reflective of the diversity of our Hawaii people. I, am known to sort of focus on the Native perspective, but in fact, my immigrant blood is actually more than my Hawaiian. I mean, if you're going to look at blood quantum, my father is pure Spanish. My grandparents immigrated from Spain. They were sugar workers in the first sugar plantation on Kauai, Koloa Sugar Plantation. And it is because of my grandparents that until today we have a legacy of Aina in the family. through my mother's side of the family, which is the Hawaiian Chinese, that I know was lost before I was born for a number of reasons. It wasn't stolen or involuntarily taken or anything like that. The family made a decision and it was intentional, and they sold the property. So I have aloha for all of my ethnicities, but that I say in my writing I do have a perspective about the immigrant experience through my father's family, a very large family on the island of Kauai, and my mother's family, a very large family in Hilo and all over the place. So um, all of this is to say that I really appreciate that Bamboo Ridge has steadfastly um, provided a forum for all of these diverse voices. And I have, I've written, extensively about the Hawaiian perspective for reasons that I think are probably, how would you say, explained in the interview with Hope. But I've also written about the experience of my Spanish ancestors and my experience growing up on the island of Kauai, which is where I'm originally from. Um, and it's kind of like really different. My experience with my Spanish family and the experience and influence of my Hawaiian family, and both are very, very rich and beautiful. The people very generous and loving and all of that. So anyway, I'm going on and on and on, but I thought that that I could bring a perspective that sort of amplifies why Bamboo Ridge is so important. So mahalo nui.
Mahalo, Mahealani, and I can go next, just a natural flow, perhaps. And to answer the initial question, why did I decide to participate? I was more than eager when I first received Donald's inquiry, because even the way that you had framed it, Donald, I think you had sensed a little bit of really my desire to get to know Mahealani a little better. I mean, you and Misty both are the amazing behind the scenes people who just make this happen, and I'm so fortunate to have had this opportunity, really, because you folks made it possible. And in following my interests, I just had so many questions that I've carried ever since reading Mahealani's work for the first time. And so I remember that part of our interview to Mahealani when you had been describing really the conception of one of your poems, and it was out of this world, really. I mean, the imagery had really stuck with me the first time I read the poem, and I just remember wondering like what this poem possibly could have been about. And when you were explaining it to me, there were just so many things that suddenly made sense. And I really think that's part of the beauty of oral history, as you were describing earlier in your presentation, Donald. I mean, the behind the scenes, the stories that come out so naturally because of the nature of interviewing storytellers and poets and these people who have imbued their written work with so much intention. I'm just always so curious to hear more about the intention, and more about the craft and the details that are behind, the beautiful publications as we know them. And yeah, there's just beautiful things that inevitably emerge. So mahalo again for this opportunity and to all the people who really made it possible.
I'm just gonna cut in as other folks are preparing to provide it. I just want to just mention for the sort of the record that, and I think what Mahealani was saying, what Hope was just saying, when we select interviewers, that's exactly what we want, is that level of interest and love for the work, because that's that just creates deeper conversations, and you're so much more interested. I think if you look at your transcript, you can kind of see that sort of engagement. That's not just someone just sort of sitting there blankly, like asking some questions that they read. It's actually that engagement with the history. And I think that engagement with the history is exactly what oral history is about. It's about bringing that to life. And I think it's about bringing it to life in a way that sometimes you get when you have a conversation, like, and Hope, I didn't know you loved Mahealani so much until that event we had, like, I think like a year ago or something at UH. And I think everyone in the room, I mean, I wish, I'm not going to ask you to read here, but to hear her read was so powerful, and I just remember seeing the interaction that's there, and there was a lot of good conversation that came about, and some of the stuff that comes out in the transcripts you might get, but you only get it in that really limited space of just the side conversations or the chat during the reading. And so this is kind of, with oral history, is that opportunity to maybe record that, because you just don't get it otherwise. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I shouldn't have cut in. Go ahead. Thank you. You guys are wonderful. Thank you guys for participating. Christina or Jen?
Yes, thank you so much, Donald. When Donald asked me to participate in the oral history project, I was really excited, particular because, echoing what Donald said, he paired us with writers who we have a deep love and respect for. So I had the opportunity to talk with Nora Okja-Keller. Prior to this, I had taught her book, Comfort Woman, in my Asian American Literature course. So I was nervous and fangirling, but Donald also took us through the training, and that training was really excellent because it kind of it framed the interview not like so much an interview, but more so a conversation between two people, like kind of like a mentor and a student. I'm learning from my mentor. That's how I saw the interview. So there's a couple of reasons why I decided to participate. The first reason is because I truly respect and believe in what Bamboo Ridge does. Like, they bring a community of writers from Hawaii together, and then the work that gets published, it does, as Mahealani says, it brings together these diverse perspectives and experiences that come from the inside. We don't get this really surface level, kitschy mainland perspective of Hawaii. We get real stories. So every time I read like a poem or a novel or even Donald's book, I feel like, oh, this is the experiences in the book that I can actually relate to. And that's really special to me, having grown up here. The second reason is, again, I really respect and appreciate and love Nora Okja-Keller's writing. I believe that she represents the lineage of writers that I identify with. And for me, her books, Comfort Woman and Fox Girl, really resonated with me because, one, I grew up in the 1990s, so it gives me a new frame of understanding my history in relation to Comfort Woman, in relation to the testimonies of Comfort Women that were coming out during the 1990s and early 2000s. And secondly, I was just so inspired that even fiction can have a testimonial imperative, and it reaches people's hearts in different ways. And that's what I learned from her book. So I wanted to get her insight. I wanted to learn about her process. Her books like amplify the voices of these testimonies of Kum Jung-hwa. So the experience was amazing. She is as beautiful of a person as her words are. I just love talking to her. I love learning about even her her role as a teacher, teaching in the I think it was the 90s and 2000s. I got to get a sense of what types of books students were reading back in the day, and Punahou and public school, and they were still very just focused around American canon. But like, writers and teachers during this era, they start to push back, push the boundaries, introduce women writers, introduce poets and other writers from Bamboo Ridge. And that's what I learned. That like she introduced these books and these works from Hawaii to her students. And I think what I learned was I don't know, I just what I learned was the interview process and the transcription process was a process of empathy. And I really love the oral history format opposed to the interview format. I really love it because as I was editing the transcriptions from the interviews, I wasn't just like looking at the, grammatical errors that, what do you call Zoom created in their transcript. I was listening to Nora Okja Keller's nuances, her words, and also like listening to her laughter and pauses. So that it was challenging, but I really wanted to, bring her voice in the written transcript. So that's what I learned.
Wow.
So that leaves me. Okay, I came to creative writing very late in life. I was almost 40 before I had my first poem published. And I'm not from Hawaii, but I remember when I was here looking at Bamboo Ridge and thinking, wow, this is really an amazing book. And I never dreamt that I would be able to do anything that got published in it. So in 1998, when my first poem was published, I was just overwhelmed. And when I retired, I really wanted to contribute something to Bamboo Ridge. And I was thinking, what's something that really needs to be done? And I thought, well, an oral history makes sense. And I didn't know Marihara, but when I talked to Craig, he underscored the fact that we needed to talk to these people before they were not able to talk anymore for whatever reasons. So I was very glad that everyone was able to come together and put this together. So in terms of what I'd recommend to anybody doing an oral history is get somebody like Donald Ching, who's extremely organized, prepares everything very well, contacts people, and is able to convince them to be interviewers. And Misty Saniko, who is an incredible IT support person who made all this possible. And Craig Howes, who was the one who talked to me about this and said it was a great idea, and that he should get his PhD student, Donald Carreira Ching, to be in charge of it. So those are important pieces. But the whole idea of preparing for the interviews, getting somebody who knows what oral history is, and because we have the original training from the Center for Oral History, and that was very helpful. And that was a lot of that was Craig's doing. But I guess so. I've interviewed six people: Wing Tech Lum, Jane Toyama, Rob Wilson, Steve Sumida, Joe Stanton, and Craig. And what I was fascinated by is the amount of passion they have, because you go back into their early days when they were first reading, they certainly were gripped by the quality of the written word and how much that really fascinated them and pushed them into this literary world. That's one thing they had all in common. And as with Mahealani, they were all very humble about it, saying they're very appreciative of the fact they were getting a chance to be interviewed by Bamboo Ridge. So I'm still hoping that maybe with our 50th anniversary coming up, maybe we can get oral history of volume printed, but for that particular occasion. I don't know, that's another pipe dream, but so was the oral history when I first thought of it. So thank you.
Thanks, Ken. I don't know if I can live up to all those good things, but I did do something occasionally. Not. I think, you know, Christina answered some of the other questions. I don't know if I think Amanda and Mahealani, I think you folks kind of stuck to the first two, but I don't know if you wanted to, or maybe you guys did talk about it. I don't know. I'm interested in, you know, especially because all of you folks really, you know, you folks were so, and I think it always happens this way. And like Ken, I've done too many of these oral histories. I don't know how many people I've interviewed. Um, and as some of you experienced, you sort of come in thinking you'll be able to cover those questions in an hour. And it's like, okay, we're like at hour 2 and you've only gone through 7 of the questions. I need another interview. Um, I'm interested, you know, and so you make the questions, you're so prepared. Was there stuff that came up that was really just unexpected that you just were not prepared for happening in a good or a bad way, I think. And this is also a question, you know, really to have you here, Mahealani, I think is really important because I think like when I interview folks, I think folks are surprised at how emotional it becomes of an experience. Like they're like, oh yeah, I'm ready to talk about these things. I've always talked about these things. And then, you know, we start talking about, especially like in the beginning, because like I always start with questions like, you know, where are you from and your community and your parents, and it all of a sudden really changes the perspective of it. But I don't know, is there anything unexpected happened during this interview that you were surprised to sort of remember or recollect or that came about?
Yeah, I got something. When I was talking to Craig Howes, I didn't expect him to talk about this, but he was talking about wing text poetry. And apparently he had attended a reading where Lisa Lynn Kanai was reading one of Wing Tech's more, how should I say, romantic poems. And she really imbued it with a lot of passion. And Wing Tech said that he hadn't understood his poem until he heard her read it. So that was great.
Yeah, I found myself unexpectedly digressing a lot. Um, you know, taking off-roads here and off-roads there, and you know, I kind of like, you know, I have a left brain, right brain kind of thing going on. I made my living as an administrator, and so that's, you know, that's the part of the brain that it's like what you described, Donald, you know, administrative. You get things done, da 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 da. And so I expected the interview to be more, I guess, more disciplined on my part. But I found myself wandering down, you know, going the poetry path, sort of digressing and you know, and I would be reminded of these little stories and stuff. And I felt like kind of like things are getting out of control. And it's not in my nature not to want to be in control. I mean, that's, you know, when I feel like that, I kind of like pull back and try to, you know, get a grip. So I mean, the experience was really, really it was emotional for me because she was able to rekindle things that I had probably forgotten, and I felt um, I don't know, I felt like yeah, I don't know how else to express it, but you know, it wasn't the orderly kind of interview or experience that I had anticipated. And you know, when Donald talks about it going on long, after a while, I thought, wow, you know, I actually genuinely felt sort of an emotional fatigue um, that is really rare for me these days. You know, after you've lived a while, as long as I have, you kind of, you know, been there, done that, okay, right, let's go, you know, but you know, it sort of dredged up all of these feelings. So that was kind of unexpected. And you know, I thought, I gotta apologize to Hope because I kept like wandering on down these trails that were totally irrelevant. I don't even know if I told the story about how when we were kids, you know, we lived in this, I'm gonna digress right now. Um, we moved from, you know, this idyllic Hawaii country lifestyle with horses and cows and gardens, all of that. And because of uh, relationship issues with my parents, they separated. And my mother, and I'm the oldest of 7 children, so she brought us all to Honolulu, and we lived in the tenements right there on 4th Street. And I still remember the address. It was 1278 4th Street. And one of the things we did to recreate, and I was telling somebody about this the other day, is that we would get these 2x4 planks of wood, and then we would put one nail on one side and one nail on the other side, and put a clothespin on one side, and then stretch an inner tube strip between the two, and then chase each other. That was how we played. And this is a big difference from Lawai, where we used to, like, maybe at the worst, we'd throw guavas at each other. But this is the sort of digressions that, she had me going down, and I'm going, what's going on here? It's just so crazy. But that was what was unexpected for me. And I thank you for that, Hope. I thought you were very full of empathy and patience. And I don't know, I really appreciated your approach. So thank you for that.
Thank you for leading us down those trails. One thing that really was unexpected and stayed with me, I think, was we had a few different conversations about gardens and plants, and I was really blown away, particularly when going back and reviewing the transcript and realizing how much we had talked about plants. Um, but you were describing gardens in different places that, mothers carefully cultivated, that you tended to. You described the fruits that you used to eat growing up in Levi, and favorite flowers and the plants that are growing just down the street of the house where you currently live. And I apologize too, because this is just all of my interests that maybe we lingered a little for a little while in the gardens. But I think there was something there that I was able to uncover for myself about how narratives and stories can provide, like landscapes, and you can recall the flowers that just bloom for a day, but can be perpetuated in different ways, and their fragrances linger on. And when I was reflecting on all of that, it just came kind of full circle to think about how your book of poetry, which we also discussed, is Uluhai Malama, or Queen Liliuokalani's Garden. And I think that might have just been something that was central to our conversation. And even as far as we strayed, it all kind of came back in a certain way. And so I just wanted to mahalo you for that as well. And another thing that I really appreciated, and I don't think I had directly asked in any of my questions, but I was so interested in the different performance aspects that you were really just describing, especially because of your relationship with Imai Kalahele and the different poetry performances that you were involved in, or even the fact that your first reading for Bamboo Ridge included chanting and all of these different performance aspects that cannot always be conveyed on a page and really requires that oral history lens to really bring forth. And I'll also just say that going through the transcript and really holding these stories changed me in a way that I still can't really describe, other than to say that these stories really stayed with me and they seated within me. And I kind of think of it as I took up a kuleana, or like this imperative. Like you were saying, Christina, it's beautiful that fiction and poems can contain testimonial imperatives, but it is so true that there's something about poetry and a poet's ability to move people, that is a kuleana that as you said, Mahealani, you have to tend to, you have to cultivate, you have to take care of it, refine it in different ways. And I think that Bamboo Ridge Press is a beautiful, home for us to be having these conversations, for us to be housing these stories, and admiring gardens in this way. So mahalo again to all the people.
Christina, anything unexpected or?
I think I'm not sure. I think everything was unexpected because I've never participated in an oral history project before. But I would say unexpected in the sense that I didn't think that I would be so inspired by Nora Ocha Keller, and also talking about the power that fiction and poetry have as testimonial imperative, kind of just jumping off what Hope said, it made me realize how fiction, well, like testimonials, because I study testimonials and how they circulate in a specific moment in time, but when we get fiction and poetry, it kind of transcends any sense of time. And again, as Hope says, it creates this like landscape, and that's what I learned. I think it was really beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it is interesting, I think. I think the transcript is always to me you cover so much and you leave at the end of the interview feeling like so many different things. Like I'm always just like, oh wow, it's like, it's just like, wow, this is why I did this. This is so like, but then when you're going through the transcript, it's this sort of uncovering of that as well. Like you're reliving the interview again, and then I always have questions after. I'm like, oh yeah, I got to make sure I ask this again, or I got to have more context here because there's other things that sort of come up. And it is, I think of it like, right, it's just like with the writing process, and I think all of us here are writers. It's like when you're revising anything, it's just like that space away from it. I think writing fiction or poetry by yourself is like a conversation you're having with the work. Here you have the work, it's not yours, but you have the work, you have the person, you have yourself, and it's this larger community, maybe I'm gardening that you're sort of doing to cultivate this story. And you're thinking you're growing one thing, and then maybe you grow so much more of it, or you grow other plant. I don't know, maybe I'm stretching your analogy too far here, but I just think it's always really interesting, because I always end up with much more information, much more story, much more like wow. And in one of the interviews I recently did, like I two other people I said, wow, I wish I had done this interview back when I was doing my area exams. This gave me information that one was nowhere in the published material, or that no one shared with me, and two was so important that I almost wanted to email John Zern, the head of the UH program English department, and be like, hey, can I retract my critical introduction and rewrite this with this information? Because it was just so important to have it. And I think that's what the purpose of this project, right? It is to sort of add this history that is just nowhere. That this book was published, 10, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it exists in this static form to some degree. And now we have this other thing to sort of recontextualize it and add to it and shape it in a way that only could have been done, in this particular method and mode. So yeah, it is sort of beneficial in that particular respect.
And I,
Oh, go ahead. No,
sorry,
please.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, I'm not important. I'm just filling in the spaces.
Oh, I was just saying, like, the way that you facilitate, again, it's my first time like participating in this oral history project, but then the way that you facilitated the training and stuff, Donald, you highlighted the importance of a relationship the relationship. It's the relationships that we build, like through reading these writers' work and how, like, you know, they speak to our hearts. But then the relationship that we build with them, the level of trust we build with the writers we get to talk to during the interview process was really amazing. And I think that that's what Bamboo Ridge was to me when I saw, like, you know, when I first got this journal and I was reading it and I was reading writers from Bamboo Ridge. It's a relationship. Writing is a relationship and it's a community. And I think what was also really surprising was Nora Okja Keller, she really highlighted the community within Bamboo Ridge as well. The writing study groups, how every writer supported each other. And I was talking to her about how, oh, I wish, COVID, after COVID, I felt like a lot of that community was lost, but then we have Bamboo Ridge. It's still going strong and still facilitating that relationship. So I know I'm like repeating myself, but yeah, it taught me that writing doesn't happen in a box, that we are all in a community, and that's what makes it so beautiful. And I think that's what kind of makes it stand out in comparison to other, literary journals. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Christina. We're sort of reaching the hour mark here. I don't know. Any advice for folks if they want to sort of do a project similar or are interested in working on oral history? Yeah, we do. I'm just good at pretending. I'm really not this organized or that great at doing this job, but I appreciate that it seems like I am.
I don't have any advice. I just want to reiterate it was a really great experience. I didn't know about the trainings and all the things that preceded, the actual contact and interview with myself. But it's just, from my perspective, it was seamless. It was a really wonderful experience. So that advice should probably be coming from you, Donald, and Ken, and others who were involved with, putting together this project. It was just a really wonderful experience for me personally, and thank you for including me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for agreeing. As I said at the beginning, I don't know if that part's getting cut, but just such an important voice to have and such an amazing poet. Anyway.
I don't really have any advice either. This was my first time being involved in any type of oral history project as well. But one thing that did help me along the way, I think, was just being as transparent as possible. If there was anything I didn't know, I was just curious about it. And sometimes it led to an even greater conversation. And I think in just different practices in my life, I've also learned that we never do this work alone. And so it was really beautiful to have a whole team of folks, even in the questions that I was asking during our Talk Stories session. I, received really amazing feedback from Donald, who really just helped to and and yes, I think just the importance of knowing that it was a team effort. And yes, so just mahalo again to all the people and for I think the level of trust that everyone brought to the process as well. Everyone seemed to really trust each other. So yeah.
Thank you. Ken, do you have any advice?
Well, as far as other people doing oral history, I already suggest that they get somebody like you, etc.
Yeah.
But Not really. Let's see. One thing I would add is that given the nature of some of the people I spoke with who were on from Bainbridge at the very beginning, I learned how much local literature had been repressed up until 1978 when Bainbridge first emerged. How significant it is now to have that kind of voice for local literature. So that was a very good learning experience for me.
Thank you for that, Ken. I don't have any advice for anyone. My advice would be prepared. I think it was very helpful to have partnered with Craig, especially in the beginning. I think the PhD program really allowed that. I sort of was not I was not expecting a lot of things that sort of came up in the beginning. I think, you know, everyone here is like in the third stage for the most part. It's the first time doing it. So a lot of the hiccups were sort of worked out in that first stage, especially that first interview I did with Eric, which, you know, was 5 interviews and about 12 hours long. You know, and I had to transcribe it with Craig Howe's sort of like, are you transcribing this? Like, you know, and Christina and Hope are laughing right now because they know Craig, and shout out to Craig. I love you, you know, mentor for a very long time, friend. But you know, Craig pushes you. And so, you know, I think it's always unexpected, but I think, you know, I imagine most folks who are watching this video are probably not or here in attendance are not looking at interviewing such a large, you know, not doing such a large project. You know, I think one of the main reasons I was interested in this was because I wanted to interview my father-in-law a long time ago and do an oral history on him, because he's an individual that's lived through so many generations. He's had so many connections to people like it is and the Hokulea and you know, and at the same time, a lot of his life has not been recorded. And so I was, and you know, getting older and much of that history, and unfortunately, we never really did it. And now that history is sort of lost. So, you know, I think if anyone's thinking about doing this with a loved one, I think one thing to keep in mind is, you know, yes, you know, it's good that you have a personal connection, but be sure to ask the questions that, you know, might make the individual uncomfortable. You know, I think I was an okay choice for this. I don't know how good you folks are giving me more credit than I think is due. But you know, you've got to be objective as well, and you've got to ask the tough questions. You know, it's up to the individual whether or not they want to answer those questions and how they want to go about answering them. But I think, you know, be prepared, yes, to ask the stories, but when things come up in those stories, you know, it's your responsibility to say, okay, well, you know, that wasn't so great. Like, how do you feel about that now, looking back at this 20 years ago? You know, how did you feel about the criticism at this particular stage? How did you feel when this particular thing happened? And again, you know, oral history is different than an interview. It's not, you know, you're not trying to get the story. You're trying to record it in the way that the person wants it to be recorded. So I think for folks who are coming to this as well and thinking that it is supposed to be one thing, keep in mind that you as the interviewer have no control over it. At the end of the day, it's the person who's being interviewed that has control. So, you know, you might have 2 hours that get cut out of that oral history. So, you know, you got to be prepared and understand that this is their history and that is exactly what you're doing. You're gathering it in the way that they want it to be recorded, out of respect for them, out of respect for the history, out of respect for their perspective. And that's great. I think a lot of things, I have not had anyone been like, I don't want that recorded, but it does happen. Right? It does come up, and sometimes side conversations happen that aren't part of the record, and you cut it out, and all kinds of things happen. But I think as everyone sort of gained here, even if it's not recorded for other people, you as the interviewer, I think that's also something that maybe advice is that it's a very special experience to do this, because you're getting insights and you're getting conversations that no one else is going to have possibly. You're getting to ask questions and have conversations that may make it into the transcript or maybe not. And out of respect, it's all confidential until it reaches that final transcript phase. And you know, might have a nice 2-hour conversation where you guys are sharing all kinds of things. And it's like, oh, we're not going to have that in there. And that's just yours. It's yours forever. Doesn't go anywhere. It's a private garden in that particular respect that you get to nurture.